It's 415 CE in the city of Alexandria, and a beautiful and brilliant woman rides to work in her chariot. She is a teacher, a philosopher, a scientist, a mathematician, an advocate for reason and free thinking, but she has become an enemy of the religious in power. And so a mob of Christians pulls her from her chariot. They drag her into the Caesareum, which was originally a temple for Augustus, but had been converted into a typical Christian church at this time. And in this holy place, they strip her, beat her, they grab shards of broken pottery and flay her alive. They dismember her and they burn what is left. It is a gruesome scene, to be sure, but it is first and foremost a message. Science will bow to faith. This is a prominent point in a huge shift that happened in the ancient world that entered a new kind of dark age, if you will, with the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, something else that deserves its own episode here for Thinking Thursdays. This story about this woman, Hypatia of Alexandria, is fascinating, and so are all its surrounding players. Her father and his role, her upbringing, and the other female philosophers that influenced her. Going all the way back to Alexander the Great himself as he establishes the city centuries before, making it a place for equals, which is why it thrived, why it was the center of such intellectual and scientific and philosophical amazement. The subsequent takeover by the Romans and then the rising Christianity within that Roman power that would come to blow against the Jewish and pagan population. The succession of governors and bishops that led to this ultimate tension that again reaches its climax in, I believe, the death of Hypatia and the final destruction of the Library of Alexandria. What a story. And I want to give you just a glimpse into this individual, Hypatia of Alexandria, for today's episode. I want to talk about who she was. I want to talk about what she believed. I want to share her accomplishments. I want to talk about why she was silenced. And I'll leave it up to you to make the comparisons for if you see this playing out in any way in today's day and age. There might be more similarities here than you think. So let's start with who Hypatia is. She's born sometime between 360 and 370 CE. She's the daughter of Theon of Alexandria, a famous mathematician and philosopher in his own right. In fact, we have records of her as a teenager helping him with editing the works of Ptolemy. As she grows up, she becomes head of the Neoplatonist school in Alexandria. There she taught logic, ethics, astronomy, and mathematics. And for a good while there, she was respected by both pagans and Christians. She taught both. Both were in awe of her intellect and her philosophy. She was a unique bridge that could gap these different belief systems and philosophies and ideologies. Some of this was due to what seems to be just her demeanor, her reputation, but some was what she believed as a Neoplatonist. Let me walk you through some of her accomplishments, and then we'll talk about what she herself believed and how that played a part here. She made many advancements in mathematics. At this time, the work was not so much coming up with new ideas as it was editing and checking the current works and adding on to them. Many of you who watched the eclipse last year have, in part, Hypatia to think, as her work was primarily on conic sections. She helped preserve and comment on Euclid's Elements, one of the most historically important mathematical texts. She improved the design of certain mathematical and astronomical instruments. We have letters of people asking her for them in an age where people didn't have factories that were producing these instruments or didn't have any kind of control about how they were made. She was at the forefront of this. All of her writings are unfortunately lost, but because of how others have referenced her writings, we know that she had amazing contributions in both math and sciences. Her work was seen to constantly be simplifying ideas, bringing them to the public square. And aside from her mathematics and scientific research, she was a philosopher at heart, a great orator, well-spoken, fair, and again, beautiful. We have many letters showing that many a young man was infatuated with her. There is one account of her using her sanitation cloth, for lack of a better term, to dissuade him. After all, as a Neoplatonist, she had committed herself to a life of celibacy. Another reason that she might have been appreciated by Christians. There's a lot of overlap between some of her beliefs and how she could apply them again to the Christian belief. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But she advocated for reason, for logic, and for empirical science over superstition. again, that's just what Neoplatonism is. It is a school of thought that combines Plato's philosophy with scientific inquiry. Now, because of all of this, she was often outspoken against the harsher concepts within Christianity, the dogma and superstition. If YouTube was around back then, you would have been watching Hypatia debates in the same way that people watch Christopher Hitchin debates. She debated both Christian leaders and political leaders. So quickly, I want to tell you a little bit more about her Neoplatonist beliefs because I think that'll help you place her in time and give you the necessary background to understand what happened here. First and foremost, she believed that truth could only be arrived at through reason and evidence-based inquiry. Therefore, she saw science and philosophy as interconnected and necessary for each other. Christianity was on the rise, and yet she did not conform to it. She could not allow herself to. She was too intellectually honest to fall prey to this. She welcomed both men and women. Of course, herself being a woman, this would have been important to her. This was not perfectly common, though we have other examples, like when we covered Epicurus. And also, a little bit off topic, but at this time in Alexandria, many things got resolved with riots, with fighting. Again, the history of what she would have witnessed in this city in her lifetime is something to be understood. But she maintained rational discourse over violence or coercion, a beacon of humble intelligence and actual character. Now, her exact stance is really hard to get in terms of what she believed or about a god system, because again, all of her writings are lost, but we can make some good assumptions based off the time and place that she was, some of the things she spoke about that have been recorded about her, and just again, this Neoplatonist idea in general. She likely believed in some form of higher abstract reality, but she definitely rejected anthropomorphic gods or religious dogma. As a Neoplatonist, she would have held that reality was structured by a hierarchy, with a higher unknowable one at the very top, the ultimate source of existence, though again, completely abstract and undefined, not with all of these triomny properties. However, as she taught both pagans and Christians, both could look at this ultimate one and take what they wanted from it. This again is how she helped bridge the gap in her teaching, why she was still respected by both. Kind of the same way that the Christian has more respect for the agnostic or the deist than they do for the atheist or the anti-theist. At least in deism or agnosticism, they can still find their way to their God. When you go a step further, you lose that commonality. So no, not a personal God, more actually of a philosophical principle, an abstract source of order, reason, and existence. So, why was she a threat? How did we go from this respected philosopher teaching all kinds of people, all stations of life, all genders, seemingly respected and adored and even promoted by certain powers that be, to this gruesome scene at the chariot? Well, there's much background to understand, but we're going to look at two central characters, Cyril of Alexandria, who becomes the bishop, and the Roman governor Orestes. Church versus state, which was incredibly diminishing at this time. Christianity was gaining a lot of power and influence, politically speaking. Hypatia had a rationalist worldview opposing these kinds of structures and belief systems. Not to mention her public role as a woman in authority only amplified the threat that she posed, as the religious at this time had become completely male-dominated. So, again, Christianity is no longer persecuted. It had been. It went through its own revival, and now it's becoming the dominant force in the entire Roman Empire. Orestes himself, the Roman governor, is a very interesting figure, but one of the cool things here is he really liked Hypatia. She was a friend. She was even an advisor. But Cyril of Alexandria, again the bishop that wanted more power for himself and for the church, did not like Orestes, and he thought he would have much more sway over him if there wasn't always the chirping in the ear from Hypatia about these dangerous ideas like reason and science. And so started a smear campaign. Cyril's followers accused her of practicing sorcery. Again, there's so many parallels here, not just with what's happening now, but what happened in other parts of history and time, that you have this scientist using nothing more than tools of thought and proven mathematics to make actual gains in the world for the betterment of all society. And it's essentially called witchcraft by the religious that don't understand it or want to be able to fight against it because it gets in the way of their superstition that they try to put on the people. More rumors spread. She was using pagan magic to manipulate the governor. She had cast a spell on him. There was a group of fanatic monks, and there's some confusion if they were the ones who actually took her out of the chariot or they just continued to stoke the fire for the Christians in general that ended up taking her down. But either way, we see a few religious and believing factions that thought it would be better if she was not around, and again at the propaganda of Cyril. And then came the fateful day in 415 CE, where a Christian mob led by Peter the Lector, again deserves his own story about how he plays a part in all of this, but to stay on topic today, this mob attacked Hypatia on her way to work. A straight-up assassination of an individual. Not that this was uncommon to take out political enemies, but there's so much more here, which is why she's been immortalized as a symbol for many different groups, whether it is for logic or for science or for feminism or for education. Again, so many places that you can see yourself in her, or the cause that you care about, or the truth that you claim. In fact, if she had not been murdered, and also if she had not been murdered in such a gruesome way, she may have very well just been forgotten. Another quick note of impressive people in this time and place. But they wanted to send a message, and ultimately that message backfired. However, it was pretty darn effective at its time. I don't think it's a big coincidence that after this gruesome killing of this individual, within less than a year, you get the final destruction of the Library of Alexandria. This is why she is known as the last scholar of Alexandria. So again, not to try to focus on the gore so much, but this was symbolic in every way, shape, and form. There's assassinations and then there's messages, and I want to break down what they did and why and how to explain this message a bit better to you. The goal, of course, to erase her influence, to humiliate her legacy, to assert Christian dominance over pagan intellectualism. Every step of the torture and mutilation and destruction was deeply symbolic. Let's start with dragging her to the Caesareum, to the church. This is forced submission to the church's authority. You thought you could avoid us, you thought you could have it both ways, you thought you could do your own thing. You're wrong. We, God, the church, whatever you want to call it, will find you, will take you, and will bring you where you should be. How you get there is your choice, but if we have to do it this way, this is what it's going to look like. They could have done this at night. They could have done it in the street. They did it in daylight, and they dragged her to the church to make this point. This is a ritualistic act forcing a pagan philosopher to face the authority of the church. It also serves as a public stage. What would any of this mean if it couldn't be witnessed, if it couldn't be used as fear and control? Next, they strip her naked. Common in many of these events throughout history, always with the same goal. You could compare this to even why Jesus was stripped naked before his execution on the cross. It's to take their power away. Loss of power and humiliation, shame, a denouncement of what they stood for, literally taking away her status. Especially for Hypatia, there was a common scholarly teacher robe that she would have been wearing. No robe, no authority for what the robe represented. She's now powerless. She's now vulnerable, and so are her ideas. Of course, we know in the Christian context, nudity was often associated with sin. They were dehumanizing her. They were demonizing her. Adding in the fact that she was a female only heightens all of these endeavors. Next, they used the pottery shreds to flay her alive. Now again, much of this is open for interpretation and debate, but many have put forward the idea that taking someone's skin off is an erasing of who they are, in the same way that her books would be burned, that her words would be erased from time. It's foreshadowed by what they did to her actual body, taking away who she was from existence. Ostraka, the pottery shreds that they used, were often used for writing. It seems clear that they did this on purpose, that what she used for her power, they used against her to erase her power. This would have been a slow and agonizing death. Her suffering was long and visible, again serving as a public warning for anyone that might have still been holding on to these pagan ideas and influences. There's a new sheriff in town. It is the church. It is Christianity, and it is time to fall in line. But they're not done. Next, they dismember her. This violent fragmentation of her physical body seems to go hand in hand with the destruction of her ideas and her works and her contributions. In Neoplatonism, again the philosophy she adhered to, they saw the pursuit of knowledge as the unified whole. Dismembering her could have been a symbolic attack against that unity. And again, coming from the context of Christians being the ones doing this, in the Christian tradition, martyrs' bodies were preserved as these holy relics. By scattering Hypatia's remains with the dismemberment, they deny her this possibility, actively fighting against the idea of her becoming some martyr for knowledge. And last, they burned the remains. There's two conflicting sources here. Some say that her remains were burned inside the church, and others say they were taken outside the city's walls to be burned. Fire in this religious connotation, of course, meant purification. It is a purging of everything that she was and stood for. Now, there's some more practical things that we don't have to read as deeply into. Of course, burning is just a common punishment for heretics in general, but again, probably backed up to many of the same lines of thinking. And how did the church react to all of this? Did they condemn it? Did they say, no, that was a group of religious zealots? No, those are the fanaticals that we can't control, just a byproduct of how big we are and how far our reach is? Nope. The man that was most associated with the death of Hypatia, the bishop himself, Cyril of Alexandria, was canonized as a saint. Pagan philosophy then becomes outlawed right after the death of Hypatia. Schools were closed, books were burned, and science was replaced by theology. The Dark Ages followed, where scientific progress was stifled for centuries. Of course, because of this, none of Hypatia's works survive to today, only descriptions of her genius from fragments and letters that we still have. It's really interesting to think about this special point in time. And again, there's many of these points, and there's things happening all around the world with different religions, different philosophies, different avenues of science. But what was going on in Greece and when it was stamped out by Roman Christian rule is one of the times in history where I think we can point to the disadvantage to mankind that has been done through the Christian religion. Again, this is an epic story all around this epicenter that I think needs to be told and shared much, much more, and I hope to bring you little parts of it here and there on these Thinking Thursday episodes. If you want to learn more about Hypatia or this time in history or this fallout in general, I will link some books down below. And it's also fun to see Hypatia kind of show up in pop culture from time to time. I am told, though I haven't watched it, that in the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan, there is a special episode dedicated just to Hypatia, so be sure to go and check that out. I'll link it down below. I've also been made aware that there is a film called Agora that came out in 2009 that depicts her life. I'm excited to go and watch that myself. One of the places I have seen her is in The Good Place at the end, spoilers, when they are in heaven. Funny enough, considering that one of the videos I'm best known for is my problems with heaven, it is Hypatia, played by Lisa Kudrow, that first shows the problem with boredom in heaven, as Hypatia, who we know was brilliant, is reduced to just utter stupidity after the centuries already spent in this place. Watch The Good Place if you have not. There is the Hypatia Society, which is a group dedicated to supporting women in STEM fields, and even a crater on the moon named after her. And again, so many different groups have taken her as a beacon, a symbol, a representation for standing against tyranny, for truth at any cost, for ethical leadership, for walking the talk, for so many things that she can be for us. No, she wasn't perfect. Yes, she still believed in things that many of us wouldn't believe in. In some ways, she was still a product of her time and place. But even amongst all of the realities, I personally think she is one of the greatest figures in history that needs more time and attention, and I'm glad to have done my part today in giving you just a little bit of that. So that's it for today. Thank you for being here. I'm hoping that you guys are liking these episodes. If you have any critiques for me on how to make them better for you, please let me know. I do love helping people with their doubt and deconstruction and deconversion through my typical videos, but this is the kind of content that I absolutely love making. These are the things that get me giddy and excited. So thank you for allowing me to share this with you. Have a wonderful day. I will see you Sunday with a new video. And until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Alexander, Ann, Boris, Eric, GVI, Joe, Kitboga, Perry, and Shawn, my Humanist heroes, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Thronus, my Atheist advocates, Caleb, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, with a special shout out to all of my secular scholars and free thinkers, and also wanted to acknowledge all of my skeptics and rationalists who are not on the screen. Because of your combined generosity, we're able to help those who are doubting, deconstructing, or deconverting. If you haven't yet, would you please consider joining these fine people? Thanks, and have a great day.